Not gonna lie, this one was hard to watch, but also really good. Hello, my name is Joe and welcome to my channel. Man, this last episode was a rough watch, huh? So good, but so painful at the same time. After watching it though, it really made me want to make this video that's been kicking around in my head for a while, talking about Jaune's role as Ruby's foil. Now, for those of you who don't know, a foil is a character that writers use to highlight certain traits in other characters through contrast. Now, that might make you think, aren't Jaune and Ruby really similar in a lot of ways? And yeah, they are. A foil doesn't have to be the complete opposite of the hero in every way. In fact, a lot of the time, they're really similar and the writers use those similarities to put further emphasis on specific traits. Ruby, as the most central character in the show, has had several foils. In fact, I'd say that every member of Team Ruby has acted as a foil to one another to varying degrees throughout the show. Even Cinder is a kind of villainous foil to Ruby. Some could probably argue Neo is as well, but it's tricky because of how much her characterization comes from Roman Holiday. But I think Ruby's best foil is Jaune, and it's not even close. You can see this facet of their characters developing not only in the first volume, but in the first scene that they shared together. I feel like people sleep on this scene a lot because Volume 1 Jaune wasn't exactly the most popular, which is a real shame because it's such an effective introduction to Jaune's character. How he's kind of an asshole and definitely overcompensating for his lack of confidence, but fundamentally a good person who decided to help Ruby just because. It's why I knew I had to include at least a version of it in my April Fool's What If, and why I get so mad every time I remember how they cut it from every adaptation Ruby gets. And while it does a great job of introducing Jaune as a character, I think it might do an even better job of setting him up as a foil to Ruby. While in her previous scene with Yang, Ruby lamented how weapons were better than people and asked why she would need friends, not wanting to talk to anybody, Jaune immediately contradicted that mindset by going to help her for no reason but why not, and then talking about how strangers are just friends you haven't met yet. I even have a headcanon that Ruby befriending Penny, despite her team telling her not to, was Jaune's words sticking in her head. And don't even get me started on their weapons and designs. Crescent Rose and Crocea Moors are really the first two weapons we are properly introduced to, and them being so night and day can't be a coincidence. While Crescent Rose is this complicated piece of transforming machinery, Crocea Moors is literally the most basic level 1 equipment in the whole show. While Crescent Rose is forged by Ruby herself, Crocea Moors wasn't even originally Jaune's grandfather's, it belonged to his grandfather's grandfather. And while Ruby holds her weapon with flourish and flair even when just pulling it out, Jaune struggles to even use his shield's transformation function without dropping it. And then their designs are night and day as well. This time, almost literally. Jaune being this tall, bright ray of sunshine looking guy with white and yellow as his main color scheme. Then Ruby is this small gothic looking girl with a black and red color scheme. Then, when we reach the Jaundice arc, we learn another parallel aspect of Jaune and Ruby. While Ruby's battle against Roman earned her entry into Beacon early, Jaune hadn't earned his at all. While Ruby was so prodigiously talented that she is able to keep up with students 2 years older than her, Jaune was too incompetent to even go to combat school. The two of them both being leaders and having these extenuating circumstances made this demonstration of being foils even more clear, especially when Ruby gave Jaune that pep talk. However, I think where you really start to see how strongly Jaune acts as a foil to Ruby is post-Volume 3, where you start to see how the both of them react and cope with trauma. Throughout Volumes 4 and 5, we see how Jaune wears his heart on his sleeve, showing his grief and anger at anything that reminds him of Beacon, of Pyrrha. He's trapped in his thoughts from it, never moving on or truly accepting what happened. He stews in his grief, even training with an old Pyrrha video on repeat. Ruby, on the other hand, consistently bottles up her emotions. She pushes them down and tries to move forward to help everyone else, constantly trying to keep moving forward. It's actually really similar to their fighting styles. Jaune stays mostly stationary, just absorbing the hits as they rain down on him, while Ruby stays in almost constant motion, trying to avoid getting hit at all. To put it another way, Jaune's grief is loud and likely to sweep people up in it or push them away. Like when his confrontation with Cinder at Haven got all of his friends to gear up, despite Crow telling them to stand down. Meanwhile, Ruby's grief is quiet, able to go unnoticed and ignored while it wears away at her mental state. This is pretty much always the case, except for this one scene. And it's a scene that I think is really important to the most recent episode. That scene being in Volume 4, Chapter 11, with Jaune and Ruby's talk in Kuroyuri. In this scene, we see Ruby try to apologize to Jaune for dragging Team Juniper on her journey to Haven, blaming herself for putting them in danger after they already lost Pyrrha, despite the fact that Ruby didn't know about the dangers they would be facing with Salem and Tyrion. It's really rare for Ruby to show this level of vulnerability and regret without just making it into a pep talk to make someone else feel better. The only other time I remember her doing it before volumes 7 and 8 was when she confided in Maria that she didn't know what to do. After Ruby gives this apology, Jaune tells her that she doesn't have to apologize, that they had wanted to go with her. He even goes into telling Ruby how she gives courage to him, Nora, and Ren. For Jaune's part, this is the first time in the show he's really acknowledged Pyrrha's death and the fall of Beacon without falling into his grief and anger. In fact, he turns it around to give a hopeful message of how Ruby inspires him by being strong enough to keep going after losing so much more than he had. While this is a very in-universe case of Jaune shifting in response to Ruby's emotional state, it happens more often on a meta level. When Jaune is weak and not able to work through his grief, the show uses it to highlight Ruby's strength and resilience even in the face of all her hardships. Then, once Ruby's mental state starts declining, Jaune is able to act as the level-headed mediator to keep the team from falling apart. These things happening are the natural progression of the characters, but they are written to progress that way so that Jaune can continue to be her foil, allowing the audience to see what the writers want you to focus on. And it's been pretty consistent throughout the show, even as other foils come and go to also assist in that. That is, until Volume 9. Before we get into that, though, I think we should talk about destiny. The concept of destiny has a really interesting place in Ruby. It's most often associated with Pyrrha and Cinder, but it also relates to Ruby pretty strongly. And as such, it is gonna be important to Jaune, since Pyrrha, Cinder, and Ruby are the characters most important to who Jaune is. There are really two schools of thought when it comes to destiny in Ruby: Pyrrha's definition and Cinder's. Pyrrha explains in Volume 3 that her definition of destiny is a final goal, something you spend your whole life pursuing. It's not a predetermined thing, it's something you constantly work for. Cinder never explicitly describes how she views destiny, but you can tell her thoughts on it by how quickly she answered that she believed in it in Volume 3, and from Watts' monologue to her in Volume 8. She sees destiny as something that just is. Something that she doesn't have to earn because she already has it. It's why she goes off half-cocked so often in pursuit of the maiden powers. Of course it will work out, it's already been decided. It is both Ruby and Jaune's destiny to be a hero. It's another important parallel from Volume 1. They both wanted to go to Beacon to be heroes, like those from the fairy tales, and like those that held their names before them. But for Jaune, that destiny of being a hero falls under Pyrrha's definition, while for Ruby, it's Cinder's. Jaune was never strong enough, never fast enough. If it was up purely to fate, Jaune wouldn't have ever gone to Beacon, but he didn't leave it purely to fate. He grabbed what he believed to be his destiny with both hands and tried to pull it to him. He cheated to get into Beacon. He worked with Pyrrha to try and overcome his lack of talent. Every day, he chose to try and be the hero he naturally wasn't. Ruby, on the other hand, never got to choose. She wanted to be a hero, sure, but from the moment she was born, her fate had been laid out for her. She was a silver-eyed warrior, and as Crow put it when he first told her what they were, she was destined to walk the path of a warrior. She had inherited her mother's fight after Summer wasn't able to pursue it further. She just so happened to be at a dust shop when Roman Torchwick was robbing it, allowing Ozpin to see her silver eyes and bring her into Beacon, bring her closer to the war with Salem before she was ready. Then she was made a team leader despite being 2 years younger than everyone else, given a badge to wear constantly and cursed to always need to be her absolute best. If the destiny of being a hero were to be compared to water, it's like Jaune is dying of thirst in a desert, desperately seeking a single drop, while Ruby is drowning and continuously being pulled further under the surface. These two forms of the same destiny are what led Ruby and Jaune to being who they are at the end of Volume 8 and throughout Volume 9. Jaune, after everything he's lost, all of the work he has put in, still isn't a hero. Not really. Even after overcoming his hate and anger over Pyrrha, even after stopping Cinder from getting the Winter Maiden powers, even after literally becoming the knight from a fairy tale, he's still always too late to save anyone, too weak to protect the people that matter most. After everything that's happened, why can't he be the hero for once? Ruby, meanwhile, has fulfilled her destiny at every turn. She was the only one to endure the powers of the apathy when everyone gave up. She saved Argus from a Leviathan. She fought for and saved nearly every civilian life in Atlas and Mantle. She became a beacon of hope and truth, telling the world about Salem. She has been strong and brave and good through every loss and every dagger of suffering she's endured. She has been a hero through and through. But why should she have to be? Why does she have to be the hero? Why does she have to be brave and strong and good for everyone else? Why does she always have to save the day? Why can't someone save her for once? Both of their backs are breaking. One under the strain of being too good for too long, and the other for never being good enough. Then you look at the pain they've endured, how they grieve, and the time they've each been given. Jaune had to kill Penny. He had to kill a completely innocent person, a friend at that. It was her choice, but he was the one who did it. The only one who could do it. Jaune's semblance is literally giving a piece of his soul to someone else to heal them, to protect them, to make them stronger. What Penny had him do in order to stop Cinder was antithetical to the very corest part of his being. When Jaune grieves, he can't move on from it. He stews in it, letting it consume him, and he's been left to stew in his grief and his regret for decades. Nobody there to help him. Ruby lost Penny. Penny was one of her best friends, yes, but I think she represented something more to Ruby too. Penny, even after being lost, came back. I think that Penny represented hope for Ruby, and proved to her that even if hope is lost, it can be found again. In a lot of ways, it's what Pyrrha was for Jaune, too. The first person to ever believe in him. I don't think I need to point out the similarities there. After Ruby loses Penny again, she finds herself trapped in a fairy tale world without her weapon and needing to find a way out. Her team is relying on her like they always do. Because why wouldn't they? They keep rushing from one place to the next. They have to get the Red Prince's help. They have to get the Grogurt. They have to find Crescent Rose so they can find a way out of there. Ruby grieves by not grieving. By bottling things up and trying to outrun that pain. Move on from it as quickly as possible. But with the end of Volume 7, all of Volume 8, and now Volume 9, all taking place in less than a week, everything is happening too fast, and she can't keep up her pace. Something that I think a lot of people are misunderstanding about the fight between Jaune and Ruby is that it's not about if someone was right or wrong. They're both right and they're both wrong, but most importantly, they're both hurt. And they're both lashing out at each other because of that. The thing that makes this scene so hard to watch but so beautiful at the same time is how much it draws on their histories. They care for each other so much, and that means they know exactly how to hurt the other person. And they were trying to hurt each other. You can see it in how they spoke, how Ruby emphasized make-believe, and how Jaune put all the blame on her. Because sometimes when you're hurting, all you want to do is hurt someone else. Especially those you care for. In saying the paper pleasers were make-believe, Ruby is not only reminding Jaune of how Alex considered the whole world make-believe, but she's saying nothing he did mattered. all of the time and work and effort he put into saving them was for nothing. The one time he was able to actually protect someone wasn't real. And I think that the Paper Pleasers village also draws a parallel to Jaune, the place that Jaune went to as a child with his family, the place he couldn't wait to show Ruby around as they journeyed across Mistral, the place they got to too late and couldn't save a single person. Jaune, in saying that everything that happened was because of Ruby, seemed as though he was taking back one of the few moments in her entire journey that was purely supporting her. Like the encouragement he gave her that day at Kuroyuri was fake. Like he was her make-believe friend. Even then, I think you can see how their dialogue is also them blaming themselves. You know it from how they've acted for the entire series before this. Jaune blames himself for all the lives he couldn't save, and is projecting that onto Ruby. Ruby hasn't confronted her guilt and mourning over not saving Penny in the end, and is attacking Jaune for mourning things that, in her mind, aren't as big a loss. Before Ruby pulls Jaune into the argument, she asks why she has to be the one to pick everybody up. The thing is, the one who often picks Ruby up, even if just a bit, is Jaune. Jaune, almost more so than her own team, has been Ruby's staunchest ally since Volume 1. Jaune is the person she called when they needed backup from Beacon in Volume 2. Jaune and his team are the people she went to when she needed to travel across Mistral, and Jaune is the one who acted as her partner for the better part of a year during that time. Jaune is the only person that has been with her through her entire journey. The only exception being the, week when they were going to Argus and got separated. And even then, Jaune was waiting until the moment they had signal to call her and make sure that she was alright. In fact, that time at Argus is a lot like their situation now, with Jaune just stuck waiting for Ruby to get there. When I watched the scene, it felt to me like it wasn't the words Jaune said that made Ruby cry, but the fact that it was Jaune saying them. That perhaps not her best support, but her most consistent support was falling out from under her in her time where she needed that support most. But there's no knight in shining armor to wake her from this spell because that armor has rusted over. Volume 9, especially this most recent episode, shows a case where foils are so mutually hurt that they can only reflect the most damaged parts of each other. I think that the state of Ruby and Jaune's weapons at the start of the volume was very purposeful. Weapons are an extension of ourselves, as Ruby put it at the very start of the series. Crescent Rose and Crocea Moors, the first two weapons we were properly introduced to in the series, are lost and broken. Ruby and Jaune are lost and broken. Jaune was the one who found Crescent Rose and returned it to Ruby. I wonder if he's also going to help her find herself again. And if that happens, will his sword and in turn he himself be repaired? Or will they both remain shattered? We'll just have to wait and see. But hey, those are just my thoughts. What do you think? Agree? Disagree? Who do you believe is Ruby's best foil? Let me know in the comments down below. And, subscribe. Till next time, safe journeys, my friends.